This episode of Lex Out Loud is brought to you by my patrons, readers, and listeners. If you'd like to learn how to support this podcast, visit lexstarwalker.com/support. You're listening to episode 57 of Lex Out Loud, Writing Science Fiction. I'm your host, Lex Starwalker. This show is a chronicle of my journey as a science fiction novelist. Hello and welcome back to the show. I am Lex Starwalker. This is Lex Out Loud. So glad you joined me for another episode. For all you gamers and GMs out there, I hope that you caught the new episode of my other podcast, Game Master's Journey, last week. I know it's been a little while since the previous episode, but finally got another episode of that show out. Number, I think it was 289, something ridiculous like that. But I finished up the questions from our listener, Matt Yancic, that I discussed on the last episode of this show, episode 56 of Lex Out Loud. So if you enjoyed that episode and you wanted more, check out Game Master's Journey. And I answered some more of those questions. So I thought I'd start out today and just let you know kind of where I'm at and what I've been up to. Yesterday, or actually I take it back, the day before yesterday, I finished the third draft of my novel, Critical Balance. And then yesterday I formatted it for the alpha readers and got that sent out to the alpha readers. Also yesterday at the last minute, I realized or remembered that I wanted to do a glossary for the alphas. I don't think it was strictly necessary. The first wave of alphas did not have a glossary and they were able to make sense of things. But I did kind of use some terms that, although I'm not going to claim I'm the first person to ever use these terms, they are not actual words in the English language. They're kind of new terms that maybe haven't caught on yet, maybe never will. That you may have seen in other science fiction or other places, as well as some new acronyms. And I just, one of my beliefs as a writer is I feel like when you do things like that, you owe it to the reader to define those terms. And I think I did a pretty good job in the text of the book itself to do that, so you knew what the terms meant, but not necessarily the first time you saw the term. So, for instance, one of these terms is an ARI, which is ARI, all capitalized. It's an acronym, which stands for Augmented Reality Interface. And I use that term a lot in the book, and I think through context, you can figure out eventually what that means. And I think I actually in the book define what the letters stand for, but not necessarily the first time you see it. And I just think it's you probably know by now, if you've listened to much of this show, that I am all about helping the reader out as much as I can. Stephen King in his book On Writing talks about another writer. It might have been Hemingway. I'm not sure. I don't remember. But another writer who thought that the reader was often in a lot of trouble and that anything you can do, they're like drowning in deep water, and anything you can do to throw them a life raft, you should do. And I agree with that. I just recently did an episode on this show about how I really believe that our first job as writers is to communicate. And a fundamental part of communication, of good communication, is making sure that your listener or your reader understands the words that you're using. So I came up with a glossary at the last minute, which added to the time it took to get this ready to send out to the alphas. I didn't really think this was going to be an all-day thing yesterday, but it pretty much was. I don't actually know for writers who are published with a big publisher, I don't know who gets to decide what kind of appendices a novel will have, if any. It's not unheard of in fantasy and science fiction for there to be a glossary or other kinds of appendices. And I always kind of assume that was up to the publisher if that happens or not. I've heard some people on Twitter and whatnot claim that the writer gets to decide that. It probably depends on the publisher and the editor you're working with, I would assume. But I just always assumed that wasn't the writer's call, but it sounds like at least some people think that it is. So I actually thought about it because I'd never even thought about before too much about what I would want. I mean, I knew I probably would like to have a glossary, but I thought about it and decided I'd like a few appendices for my book. I'd also like to have a timeline. I've talked a lot in the first season of this show about the timeline I came up with, giving the major achievements in science and technology and space exploration between the current day right now and when my story takes place, which is in 2222. And, I put so much time into that it'd be nice to put that in the book. I recently read the book To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, and it has a timeline in it that's very similar to the one I made. I mean, it's not so much similar in what the timeline has in it as far as what happens when, but the way it's laid out and kind of the approach of it is very similar to what I did. So that's at least one book that got away with having a timeline in it. And then that book also had an essay about how his faster than light travel worked. So I'd love to have an essay in the back of my book about Kalpana cylinders and rotational gravity and more details on that and how that works than I'm able to provide in the story. And, one nice thing about those kinds of appendices is it's a great way to fight, what people sometimes refer to as world builder's disease, this tendency for us as science fiction and fantasy writers to want to turn our books into encyclopedias because we come up with all this great setting information that we want to share with the reader. And we can't always find good ways to do that in the story. So sometimes we're tempted to just put in paragraphs of exposition about this, that, or the other thing that's not really relevant, but we think it's really cool and we think the reader might think it's cool. So if you can have some appendices like these, that's a way that you can get that into the book without watering down your story with it. And it's also a way to signal to the reader that, hey, this is optional material. If you dig this kind of thing, if you're interested, read it, enjoy it. If you don't, if you're not, skip it. It doesn't matter. It's an appendix. It's not required reading. Just like the table of contents isn't required reading, right? Some people will sit and read the table of contents. I usually don't, but some people will. And then some people just completely skip it and don't even look at it. So yeah, it's optional material. So the same thing with the glossary and the timeline and the essay on the cylinders. It's all optional. It's not required to understand the story or to enjoy the story. But for those that don't want to maybe wait a couple chapters to find out what an RE is, they can go look it up and also get more information about it than maybe I'm able to provide in the story itself. However, one problem with this that I didn't realize until I'd actually made the glossary, which, I mean, it's pretty obvious, I should have realized this, is I'm adding to my word count. And I'm at the point where my word count is already getting high. It's already higher than I want. So this is really something to consider. And I'm assuming here that these appendices should be included in the word count when I submit to an agent and I tell them in the word count, it should include everything, including the appendices. So just this glossary added 653 words to the book. So I've decided because of that, I don't think I'm going to do the other two. I don't think I'm going to do the essay on the cylinders and the timeline. I mean, I might create them, but I'm not going to put them in the manuscript when I send it to agents because especially even the timeline, it would probably be at least as many words as the glossary was. So if it is between the two of them, you're talking like 1,300 words right there. And then the essay on the cylinders would probably, knowing me, it's going to be like 10,000 words or something. So I don't want to do that because my word count's already pretty high, higher than I want it to be. So I think I will include the glossary for the agents. And, because I asked on Twitter what people thought if you would include the appendices. And someone suggested giving 2 word counts, giving one with and without. And I think that's actually a good idea. If I can get away with that, I might try to do that. So just kind of to let you know what's gone on with this book. When I finished the first draft, it was at around 109,000 words. The second draft was very close. Actually, I should give you more exact numbers. The first draft was 109,096 words, or 109,096 words. The second draft was 108,636 words. So we're talking about a difference of about somewhere around 400 or 500 words that I was able to cut between the first and the second draft. So, the second draft is between 108, 109,000 words. But now the third draft with the glossary is 117,557. So I went from 109 to almost 118. So yeah, my target where I really wanted this book to end up was around 105,000, 115 maximum, and I'm at 117. Now, it's not too long. It's not so long that it will be rejected just based on length. I could get away with maybe as much as 124,000, but it's long enough that it might hurt my chances a little bit. So there's going to be at least one more, probably at least 2 more drafts of this before I start sending it to agents. So hopefully in those, I can trim it down a bit. I think I probably will be able to. You can probably tell from my podcast, I'm a pretty verbose guy. So there's got to be, maybe 10,000 words here and there I can cut out, I hope. We'll see. But yeah, I just sent it out to a second wave of alphas. So we'll see what they think of version 3. And maybe their feedback will help me decide some things I can cut. Another thing that's a little interesting here is I think, or I know, when I get this book published, if I have any say in this at all, that I really want the glossary in the beginning of the book. I want it between the table of contents and chapter 1. I want it there in the beginning so that the reader sees it, even if they're on a Kindle, and they know it's there. And hopefully we can get the Kindle. I don't know how the formatting of that works. Because usually when you open a book in Kindle, it doesn't open on the cover, or at least mine doesn't. It opens on the first page of chapter 1. So the Kindle skips the cover and the title page and the copyright page and the table of contents and all that. And it starts you on page 1 of chapter 1. And then it puts all that stuff at the end on the Kindle. So hopefully we can format the file so that the Kindle will start on page 1 of the glossary. And the reason is I want the reader to know there's a glossary there, because I just mentioned To Sleep in the Sea of Stars, and that book had a glossary in it and some other appendices. And the first time I read that book, I read it on Kindle, and I had no idea that those were there until I'd finished the book, because they were at the back and the table of contents is at the back. So unless you go look for it on a Kindle, you don't see the table of contents when you start a book, which honestly I think is a flaw in how they do that. And I don't know if that's up to, the publisher that makes the ebook file and they can control, how that's laid out, or if that's just how the Kindle does it or what. I don't know how that works. But I think that's definitely a flaw, that you don't see the table of contents, because I read that whole book and I never knew there was a glossary. And, now that I've finished the book, I don't care about the glossary anymore. I'm done with the book. The book's over. The story's over. I don't care anymore. But it would have been really nice to know that glossary was there when I was reading it, because I definitely would have been looking things up in it if I knew it was there. So I don't want that to happen with my book. I want the reader to know from the very beginning that there's a glossary. And if they see some term they've never seen before, that they can go look and it's probably in there and they can find out what it means. So hopefully we can get it in the beginning of the book. So our quote main topic today is going to be about style guides. and the serial comma. And this isn't going to so much be a grammar episode. I'm going to talk about some grammar stuff, but the real thrust of the episode isn't about teaching you grammar or when not to use a serial comma or anything like that. It's more about, as the title says, what I learned from being wrong about it. And I learned a very important lesson from being wrong about this for over a decade at least. So that's what I'm going to really talk about today. That's what this episode's about. But before I go into that, I thought maybe we could kind of relax a little bit and maybe I could just share some frustrations with you that I'm experiencing. I don't talk so much about this stuff on this show because this is more, my writing podcast. But I also used to do a lot of streaming of my tabletop RPG games on YouTube. I used to post just the audio versions of my podcasts on YouTube just to get exposure to people who maybe, watch YouTube but don't listen to podcasts. And I do know that there are people who listen to podcasts on YouTube, sometimes at work or for other reasons where that's just they're at a computer and that's the easy way to do it for them. So a lot of podcasts will just have their shows on YouTube, even, like mine without any video. It's just a static image of the album cover. So, Lex Out Loud, some of the early episodes are on there and Game Master's Journey is on there. I stopped doing it because Game Master's Journey got views, but when I was putting the Lex Out Loud episodes on YouTube, I'd get less than 20 views per episode. And it takes a significant amount of extra time to make a video, even when it's just audio in the video, if that makes sense. It takes a lot of extra time to do that. And I didn't feel like it was worth it for 20 views. Sorry for those 20 people that were actually watching it or listening to it. Especially when, you can get this show so many other places and all the different places you would get a podcast. So I quit doing it with, the more recent episodes, but the ones I did are still up there, as well as my actual plays and everything else. Well, a few weeks ago, I start getting copyright claims. And, this has happened occasionally in the past where, on one of my D&D games or something, I might play some music or something. It happened a bit because for a little bit I was on Roll20, which is a virtual tabletop web-based program that you can use to play these games online with people. They would have music on Roll20 that you could use for like background music for your game. And naively, I assumed that was unlicensed music or pod-safe music or music where you could use it and, it wasn't copyrighted. Well, it turns out that's not the case. And so some of my games, I use that music and I would get a copyright strike, which is where someone who owns the music that you're using in your video says, hey, I own this song. I did not give this person permission to use it. And then what happens is if that video is monetized, if you have ads or anything like that in the video, the money, instead of going to me, the person that made the video, goes to whoever owns the music that I'm using, at least for the part of the show that I'm using the music. So, when I produce an hour-long show and I have 30 seconds of music in it, how they determine how much of the ad revenue goes to the person that owns the music, I have no idea. I don't know if anybody knows that outside of YouTube/Google, but that's the way it works. And so that happened in the past, and it was legit. It was my mistake. I didn't realize that the music was copyrighted, and so I would either just turn off the ads because I was kind of like, well, I didn't make this video to make money for whoever did this music, and I'm not gonna make my viewers sit through advertisements just to make someone else money. So I would turn the ads off, or I would just leave it and be like, well, this person's going to get some of the money. I mean, honestly, I get pennies from those videos anyway. It's not much money at all. So it didn't really matter to me. I was like, whatever, they can get their cut. It's only fair, right? I use their music. So I've had that happen. No big deal. Well, I start getting, a few weeks ago, I start getting copyright strikes on some of the Lex Out Loud episodes that are on YouTube. And the first one I got, I went and I'm like, what is this? This is like, I don't use music in my show. The only music I use is the intro and outro music, and that is not copyrighted. It's licensed through Creative Commons, and I'm allowed to use that for commercial purposes as long as I give credit to the artist, which I do. And in every video description and the show notes of all the episodes, I give credit to the artist. It's Kevin MacLeod. The song is called Werq that I use for this show. So he gets his credit, and I link, to his the license or whatever, like I'm supposed to. Everything's, above board and the way it should be. So I'm like, why am I getting a copyright strike? Like I'm not using anyone's music that I shouldn't be. So I go and look at the episode and see which episode this is. And then I remembered, I'm like, oh, you know what? There was that one time I said something in the show. I was just talking, I was just vamping, and I said something about being a night writer, like someone who writes at night, and it made me think of the show Night Writer. And I thought, when I was editing it, I thought, how funny would it be if I could just play a little bit of the Night Writer theme song, which I really like anyway. So I did that. And I mean, it's only like, I don't know, 10 seconds or something of the Night Writer theme song like comes through in the episode. So I went and to look what episode it was, and I'm like, oh, you know what? I'll bet that's what it is. I'll bet this is the episode where I sampled a little bit of the Night Writer song, and whoever owns that, somehow, they detected it. They have bots that crawl all the videos looking for their music. And so I got a copyright strike. And I'm like, hey, that's totally fair. I use someone else's music. It doesn't matter that it's an 80s TV show that isn't in production anymore. It doesn't matter. And I'm like, well, that's totally fair. That's legit, right? And I didn't think much about it. Well, then a few days later, I get another copyright strike on a different episode. Now I'm perplexed because I'm like, I only did that the one time. That I'm pretty sure this is episode 56. I'm pretty sure in 56 episodes, that is the only time I used any kind of music that was not like my theme song, which is under Creative Commons. So I'm like, now what's going on? So this time I actually went and saw what was going on, because you can go on YouTube when this happens and they will tell you exactly where in the video this person or this group is saying you're using their property. And I hadn't done that the last time because I just assumed it was the Night Writer thing. But this time I'm like, I'm going to look into this because something's not right here. So I go and I look and see what they're actually flagging as being copyrighted. And it's the outro music, which is the song by Kevin MacLeod, which is under Creative Commons, which this is Warner Media Group doing this, which is a huge conglomerate that owns most of the music that you're familiar with. They're the ones doing this, and they don't own this song. And what's even funnier is in the copyright claim, they tell you what the name of the song is and the artist is that they're saying they own. And it's not even the right song. It's not even the song I'm using. It's some other song. Who knows what it is? I forget what it's called, but it's some other song. So I'm like, what the hell is going on here? So I'm like, well, I know, I've heard about this stuff happening, people getting these like erroneous copyright strikes. And I know that, part of how this happens is like Warner Media Group, these big conglomerate media companies, they have these bots that just crawl through videos and flag stuff, and it's all automated. I mean, no human being was probably involved at any point in this copyright strike. It's all done through algorithms and bots and whatnot. And I'm like, so somehow this bot screwed up and thinks that this is a song that they own or whatever. So I'm like, well, I know there's a process to dispute this if it's wrong. I've never really looked into it. I've never done it before, because every time I got a copyright strike before, it was legit and I didn't fight it, but I'm like, this isn't legit. This is bogus. So I go through the dispute, and, YouTube uses all kinds of scary language in this, warning you that if you dispute this and you don't have the right to use this music, that they can take your channel down and they can take down all your content. And, they threaten you with all this stuff, presumably to scare you off from disputing it. So I'm like, well, I'm not worried about that. A, because I know I'm right. And B, because honestly, I don't care if they take my channel down because I haven't posted a video in months, if not years, and I don't get any revenue from it anymore, or never really did get that much. Like it's, I don't really have anything to lose here. So I go through the dispute and then I start researching into like, how does this work? How is this arbitrated? All of that. So it turns out the way this whole process works on YouTube. So let's say a situation like mine, I use a song which I am allowed to use for commercial purposes in my videos. I have permission to use it. And then Warner Media Group erroneously, I would say fraudulently, because I think they do this on purpose, and you'll understand why once I explain how this works. But they erroneously say, hey, we own that song. We own the rights. We should get any ad revenue from this video. So you, as the content producer, are like, no, you don't. You don't own this. This isn't your song. So you dispute it. So what happens when you do that is you have to, provide evidence and tell them why you're disputing it. So that doesn't go to YouTube. It doesn't go to Google. It doesn't go to some third party, not anonymous, what's the word? Neutral. It doesn't go to a neutral third party to arbitrate it. It goes back to the person who initiated the dispute or initiated a copyright strike. So when I dispute it, it goes back to Warner Media Group, and they can either be like, oh yeah, Lex is right. We don't own that song. Sorry about that. Our bad. And, let go the copyright strike or the copyright claim. They can let it go. Or they can say, no, he's wrong. We do own this, and we want to continue to claim copyright on this. And there's no one, they can just lie. There's no neutral third party or any kind of third party to like confirm whether this is true or not, the claims that Warner Media Group is making. They can just say whatever the hell they want. So they could say, no, this is totally our song. We totally own this song and we claim copyright. Well, then at that point I can appeal it, but then it goes back to Warner Media Group and it's the same thing. They don't have to prove their claim to anyone. They don't have to support it in any way. They can just say, no, he's wrong. We own this. And that's it. I have no recourse. And beyond that, YouTube is threatening that if that happens, they may take the video down or they may take your channel down because you're wasting their time, even though they're not remotely involved in this process at all. So the other thing that can happen is when I dispute it or when I appeal it, if they reject my dispute, Warner Media Group has to respond within 30 days. They only have 30 days to respond to that. So I think there's a really good chance that all of this is going to go away because, again, I don't think any human being was involved in this at all. This is all automated, and I doubt that they're paying someone to go through these disputes. So I have a feeling what's going to happen is all these things I dispute, they're just going to sit there for 30 days, expire, and the whole thing's going to go away. But the thing is this is continuing. I just got another one today. Like almost every day, they copyright flag another one of my videos. So every day I have to take time out of my day to go dispute this. And it takes time because I have to give them a link to the license. I have to explain why I'm disputing it. I've done it enough now. It's pretty, it only takes me maybe 5-10 minutes, but it's still 5-10 minutes out of my day every day if I want to fight this, even if it just goes away. And again, if they fight me on it, I have, it doesn't matter that they're in the wrong and I'm in the right. It doesn't matter that I can prove that. It doesn't matter because it never goes before anyone who has any authority to make a decision one way or another. It's just totally up to Warner Media Group, if they want to actually be honest about it or not. So it's really frustrating. And, you can find lots of YouTubers complaining about this. Luckily for me, it's not a big deal to me other than just it's an annoyance and just kind of the principle of it. But I don't, make my living from YouTube. I don't really make anything from YouTube. That's not where my quote platform is. So, it's not that big of a deal to me, but there are people on YouTube who that's their living. That's what they do for a living. That's how they pay their bills and put food on their tables for their families. And, these big media companies are at best, they're being really sloppy, and their bots or whatever they've created to do this aren't very good at it. And they're flagging a bunch of stuff that they don't actually own the rights to. But at worst, they're doing this intentionally because they know that there's no way for anyone to stop them. And it's a way, they can make a few extra pennies on all these videos out there. And, there are so many people making videos. There are so many videos, even if it's just a few cents per video, it adds up. So it's really screwed up. And there's no recourse, for the creators. There's you're screwed. And Google doesn't care. YouTube doesn't care. They're not going to help you. They don't care. There's not even any way to talk with anyone at YouTube about this or complain or anything. So yeah, I'm kind of done with YouTube at this point. I've been done with YouTube for a while as far as a user. I used to watch YouTube all the time. I used to watch more YouTube than I watched like regular TV or movies or anything like that. And I used to really enjoy it. But over the last, 2 or 3 years, the experience has really gone downhill. And it's really the way they do the ads. It used to be a lot of YouTube videos didn't even have ads. And the ones that did, you could skip them and they were just at the beginning or they weren't very long. But these days, pretty much any video I try to watch on YouTube, there's at least 2 or 3 ads at the beginning I have to sit through. I can't skip them usually. And then even worse, they will have mid-roll ads that are ads that occur at some point during the video itself. And they're not placed there by the creator at like a transition point where like in a TV show where there's a pause and you'd have advertisements, they'll occur like right in the middle of a sentence or right in the middle of something. All of a sudden there's an ad like interrupting it. Some videos have multiple of these strewn throughout the video. I don't even remember what it was, but I watched a video. It's been a while. It's probably been a month or 2 ago that I think it was like a 15-minute video. And there were like 3 or 4 points during the video that you had to stop for ads, as well as ads at the beginning of the video and ads at the end of the video. It was ridiculous. So yeah, not only is it a horrible experience for the creators now, and creators are getting screwed, but it's not even a great experience for the people trying to watch it. So I think if or when I ever start really producing videos again, which I've talked about this on the show before, I think it was the last episode, I'm going to go to Nebula or something like it. I actually have Nebula right now, and I really like it. It's fantastic. It's like YouTube used to be, only even better because there are no ads. And also I say it's better than YouTube used to be because so far all the videos I've watched on Nebula are like really well produced. And in the early days of YouTube's, before all the obnoxious ads, the videos were not that well produced. So yeah, I really love Nebula. It's a great place. The only downside with it is there's not nearly as much content. There's not as many creators on Nebula as there are on YouTube. But, I don't think any of this is going to change for the better anytime soon or ever. Honestly, I don't think it'll ever change. I think it'll get worse. So as time goes on, I think more and more people will be going over to Nebula. So maybe by the time I'm ready to produce videos again, there'll be more people there. But yeah, that's where I'll be going. But it's just kind of ironic because I don't watch network TV because of the advertising. I stream everything and I only stream things that I can get with no advertising. Like that's why I don't have Hulu because you have to pay extra to get Hulu without ads. And I'm like, this is the whole point of streaming is to not have to sit through ads. So I don't watch TV for that reason. And let's face it, most TV shows are way better produced than a lot of YouTube videos are. So I'm sure as hell not going to sit through ads to watch a YouTube video. Sorry. Especially, let me add one more thing before I move on, especially since I have the experience of being someone who's put content on YouTube and I know how little the creator actually gets for those ads. So honestly, the obnoxiousness of the ads, they're not worth it. I mean, the creator is getting fractions of a cent. YouTube is getting the majority of the money that those ads generate. So yeah, it's just bad for everybody. All right. Well, thank you for sitting through that, through my frustration with YouTube and the joys of living in such a capitalist society. But let's talk about something more interesting and fun. And let's talk about the lesson that I have learned from being wrong about the serial comma. And in a nutshell, the lesson that I learned is that always, always, always make sure I know what the hell I'm talking about. Because it turns out that for a long time, I thought I knew what I was talking about, and I did not. I was wrong. I did not know what I was talking about. So somehow, somewhere, years ago, I got confused. And if I remember right, I think it was about the time I was writing my first book, Dawn of Endless Night. When I learned grammar in middle school, high school, whatever, I learned to use the serial comma, and I always used it. And the serial comma, if you don't know what that is when you are writing like some kind of a list, like not an actual list, like a shopping list, but when you're listing things in, something you're writing. So something like Adam had pork chops and mashed potatoes, or no, that's not a very good sentence. Adam had pork chops, mashed potatoes with gravy, or no, that's not very good. Wow, I suck at this. Adam had pork chops, mashed potatoes, peas, and carrots for supper. So the serial comma is the comma that comes before and carrots. So you would write that Adam had pork chops, comma, mashed potatoes, comma, peas, comma, and carrots. That last comma between peas and carrots, that's the serial comma. So I learned to use it when I first learned how to write, and I always used it. And everything was hunky-dory. But then somehow I got this idea in my head, and I think this happened either in college or when I was writing that first novel, that the serial comma was optional. I got this idea in my head that it was optional. You could either use it or you could not use it, and it was just totally up to you. Neither way was right or wrong, is whatever you wanted to do. I also at some point, and this might have been later, but at some point I also got the idea in my head that in British English, it was required, but in American English, it was optional. So it turns out that both of these ideas are wrong, or are partly wrong, or not entirely correct. So I'm going to go into this because I finally figured this out a few months ago when I was writing the last book. And boy, did I feel like an idiot because I've gone on the record online and elsewhere saying that it was optional or whatever. Now, something you should know about me as a writer and just in general is I am usually all for eliminating anything that's extraneous or unnecessary or not needed in my writing. If I can save a letter, if I can save a comma, if I can save a keystroke, I'm going to do that. I'm all for that. It makes it easier to write and it makes it easier to read, in my opinion. So I embraced, when I got this idea in my head that the serial comma was optional, I embraced the no serial comma because I'm like, if it's optional, if it doesn't need to be there, I'm not going to put it there because that's an extra character. It's an extra keystroke. It doesn't need to be there. I don't want it there. It's like putting extra letters in words that aren't needed. So it turns out, like a lot of things in life, it's more complicated than that. And I did not understand the whole picture. I didn't understand the context. So whoever told me it was optional, well, no, they were wrong. I don't think anyone thinks it's optional, but they weren't completely wrong. Like I said, it's complicated. I didn't have the whole picture. I didn't know the context. So what this is all about here, this whole debate, it's not really a debate. I mean, there's a flat out right and wrong answer here. But the confusion, let's say the confusion over this is it's a thing of style. And by style, I mean style guide. So there are different styles of writing, and each style of writing has a style guide, which is a kind of manual of how you should write. So if you went to college and you wrote in college, if you wrote essays, or even possibly in high school, you might have encountered this in high school. If you wrote essays or research papers or anything like that, high school or college, you might be familiar with the MLA style guide. You might have learned that. You might have learned rules from that as far as how you punctuate, or a big thing that I think was my first exposure to the MLA style guide is how you do citations, right? So if you're writing some kind of a research paper and you're going to use different sources, and maybe you're going to quote those sources in the paper, or you're going to reference them, you're going to because technically, if you're writing a research paper or something like that, and you are bringing in any knowledge that doesn't come from your own head that you learned from somewhere else, you should cite that source, whether it was an encyclopedia or a book you read or whatever it was. So the MLA style guide told you how to do that, how to do your works cited page, right? This might be ringing some bells for some of you. So that's what I'm talking about, style guide. So in American English, which is what I'm talking about today, I can't talk to you about all the other kinds of English out there because I frankly don't know. But American English is only one type of English. In British English, they have their own rules. Other different countries that speak English, they may have different rules than the British way or the American way. So I'm just talking about American English here. So in American English, we have three main style guides. We have the MLA style guide, which I just mentioned, which you may be familiar with, the AP style guide, and the Chicago Manual of Style. Now, if you're a writer, hopefully you know what the Chicago Manual of Style is. But if you don't, that's okay. If you're an editor, you better know what it is if you're editing for fiction. There's also another book that I've talked about on this show, The Elements of Style by Strunk and White, which is a great little book. It's kind of a fourth style guide, but is really more like an abridged version of the Chicago Manual of Style, because I'm pretty sure most, or if not everything, in the Elements of Style matches what the Chicago Manual of Style has, also sometimes abbreviated as CMOS, but it's like the light version. I mean, the Chicago Manual of Style, I don't know. I was going to have it in here with me when I recorded, but I'm sure it's well over 1,000 pages. It's a doorstop, where the Elements of Style is like 100 pages. It's a tiny little paperback. So it's like an abridged version. But we'll just talk about the three big ones. So the MLA style guide that you might be familiar with from high school and or college, if you had to do any essays or research papers or anything like that, is the style guide that's used for academic writing. And this is the style guide I used in college when I was getting my degree in anthropology. So as part of getting a bachelor's in anthropology, I had to write a lot of papers. I did an independent study where I wrote an over 50-page research paper, which at the time was the longest thing I'd ever written and seemed like this huge thing. But after writing a couple 100,000 plus page or word novels, 50-page research paper is kind of cute, but it's a different animal. You can't really compare writing a research paper with a novel because they're so different. But I'm not bashing research papers because they're not as long as novels, believe me. But that's what I use, MLA style guide. So if you're in college and you're having to write research papers, that's what you're using when you want to know, how do I punctuate something? How do I do a citation? How do I do my works cited page? You use that, the MLA style guide. The AP style guide is used for journalism, things like newspapers, magazines, stuff like that. And then the third style guide, the Chicago Manual of Style, is used for fiction, nonfiction, and academic papers in the arts and humanities. So yeah, I should have pointed that out. The MLA style is more for academic papers in the sciences, like anthropology, where if you're talking arts and humanities, a lot of times they will use the Chicago Manual of Style instead. And then again, the Elements of Style is a much shorter, thinner than the Chicago Manual of Style, and it focuses on clear writing and is often used by writers. And like I said, as far as I can tell, it follows the Chicago Manual of Style, it just doesn't go as in depth, and it's not as chunky of a book. So, if you're a writer and you're writing casually, and I'm talking like fiction or nonfiction here, I'm not talking like research papers or things like that, or papers for scientific journals. But if you're a writer writing like novels or short stories or novellas, or you want to write a nonfiction book about yoga or something like that, you could use the elements of style, and it's kind of an abridged version that's going to steer you right, and it's going to cover you most of the time. You'll be okay. If you're a more serious writer like me, and you're wanting to get published, and you're writing fiction or nonfiction, then you want to be using the Chicago Manual of Style, because there are going to be specific like cases, like edge cases, that aren't going to be covered by the elements of style. But the Chicago Manual of Style is exhaustive. It's huge. So what I was confused by is that the serial comma is not optional per se. Rather, it is used in some of these styles, but not in all of them. And that's what confused me. That's what I didn't understand. I just knew that sometimes you could use it, sometimes you didn't have to use it. And from that, I took it's optional, but that's not actually the case. The case is, it depends what style guide you're following. It depends what kind of thing you're writing. So specifically, the AP style does not use the serial comma. And again, AP style is for journalism, newspaper, magazine. So if you're reading an article in a magazine or you're reading a story in a newspaper, you will not see the serial comma, again, here in America, because they use the AP style guide, and the AP style guide says you don't use a serial comma. However, the serial comma is used in the MLA style guide, which is used for academic papers, specifically in the sciences, and it is used in the Chicago Manual of Style, which is the style guide used for what we talk about on this show, which is writing fiction. It's also used in elements of style. So I stopped using it because I thought it was optional. I thought it was an extra character I didn't need. But it turns out, as a novelist writing fiction, I should be using the serial comma. The Chicago Manual of Style, which is my Bible, or I don't like to say that, which is my rule book as a fiction writer, says use the serial comma. So that's what I should be doing. The only time it would be correct not to use the serial comma is if I were doing writing in an environment that uses the AP style, like if I were writing for a magazine or a newspaper, but that's not what I'm doing. So it's not optional at all. It's either used or it's not used, depending on the style that you're following. And the style that you follow isn't optional either. It's determined by what you're writing. So if you're writing journalism, you should not use the serial comma. If you're writing fiction, you should. So this means that if you're someone who maybe you're a novelist, but you also freelance for magazines and newspapers, you're going to have to wrap your brain around two different style guides. And for some of, when you're writing your novels, you're using the serial comma. When you're writing for the newspaper, you're not. So yeah, have fun with that. So the reason I wanted to talk about this today is not to let you know whether you should be using the serial comma or not so much. And it's not even so much that I, quote, learned something from this, other than that I learned I should be using the serial comma. But it did reinforce something that I already know, but I don't always remember to practice, which is this. Don't assume you know what you think you know. Anytime I think I know something and I don't remember specifically exactly where that knowledge comes from, and or it's been a while since I learned it, I should look it up. And that goes for a lot of things. That goes for how to spell a word like embarrassed, or whether or not I use a serial comma. And it goes for a lot of things. Anytime I think I know something, but I don't remember exactly where I learned it from, where it comes from, or if it's just been a while, because things change. Especially, if you're talking anything science related, you may be remembering what you were taught correctly, But we've since then learned more and we know better now. Like, for instance, the fact that Pluto is not a planet. Maybe like me, when you were in high school or whatever, you were taught that Pluto is a planet and you think you know that. But now if you go around saying Pluto's a planet, you're wrong because it's not a planet. It's a dwarf planet. So things change, especially in science. As we learn more, things change, definitions change, and you got to keep with the times, Don't be old grandpa on his rocker, like stuck in the 1920s or whatever, when they thought Pluto was a planet. So yeah, if I don't remember exactly where that knowledge came from, if it's just something that I know this is true, but I can't tell you how I know it, or if I learned it a long time ago, I should look it up. When it comes with spelling, sometimes you just remember stuff wrong. Like there are words that I know I used to know how to spell. Like embarrassed is a perfect example. I occasionally spell that wrong. It's a tricky one. I learned that word in high school or whatever and passed my vocabulary test that word was on and I knew how to spell it right at one time. But, if you don't use things a lot over time, you kind of forget them or you don't remember them as well. So things like that, I will often look up just to be sure. Memory's not perfect. And, when there's a gap in your knowledge, your brain just tends to fill it in with its best guess, and you may not even realize it's doing that. So yeah, it's good to look stuff up. So if I'm at all unsure about something, even just a little bit, I should look it up. If I'm sure about something, or I think I am, but I can't remember specifically where I learned it or who taught it to me, what the source of that knowledge is, I should look it up. If I'm sure about something, but I learned it a really long time ago, like that Pluto's a planet, I should look it up. I may not be remembering it right, or it may have changed due to new information, like Pluto being a planet. It's not. It's a dwarf planet. There are hundreds, thousands of dwarf planets in the Oort cloud. So for all those people like trying to die on a hill, saying Pluto is a planet, if we're going to have any rationality here, if there's going to be any system to how we're classifying things, if we say Pluto is a planet, then we also have to say that all the other dwarf planets in the Oort cloud are also planets, which means that when you go to memorize your planets, you don't have to memorize 9, you're going to have to memorize hundreds, if not thousands. And a lot of those planets don't have names, they have numbers. And we haven't even discovered them all. So it's constantly, every semester you're going to have 50 more planets to learn. Who wants to do that? I swear people don't think things through when they get on these hills and die on them. Believe me, you don't want Pluto to be a planet. I'm pretty sure there's none of those Pluto planet people listening to this podcast. This isn't really the audience for that, which is why I feel safe making fun of it a little bit, because I'd be surprised if any of you out there are adamant that Pluto is a planet, because you guys are all pretty smart and with it and in the science and all that stuff. So you probably know better. But that's a tangent. Sorry. I'm sorry. It just cracks me up. People just do not think things through. They don't sometimes think any farther than what's right in front of their nose. And I get it, right? We're talking about people that are probably in their 50s or older who learned in grade school that Pluto is a planet. They memorized the planets and they don't want to have to learn anything new or change because they're stuck in their ways. And so they're just going to fight and say, no, Pluto's a planet. And that's all the farther it goes. They don't think about the fact that since they were in school, we've discovered the Oort cloud and we've discovered all these other dwarf planets and protoplanets and asteroids that are as big or bigger than Pluto and whatnot. And that, well, really, if Pluto's a planet, then all those bodies need to be planets. And now you instead of saying we have 9 planets, we'd be like, we have however many. We don't even know. I don't even remember if it's hundreds. I think it's thousands. It's a lot. And they're finding new ones all the time. Now that we have the James Webb, we'll probably find a lot of them. It may even be more than thousands. Who knows? But We can't even name them all. How are you going to memorize them all? But yeah, it's silly. I think it's a lot easier just to accept that the world has moved on and there's 8 planets. It's easier. Now you only have to remember 8. You can forget about poor little Pluto. So I've looked up numerous things in recent weeks and months that I thought I knew or used to know and just got fuzzy on with the passage of time and not using that for a while. And, it's just a result of growing older and having that time since you were in school and learned all these things get longer and longer and longer. And yeah, things get fuzzy and you forget things or you remember things wrong. So yeah, it doesn't hurt to look things up. And, it's not like you have to leave your house, get in your car, go drive to the library, use the card catalog, find a reference, find the right chapter, look, all you got to do is pick up your phone that's in your pocket, type into Google, what is blank, and boom, there you have the answer. I mean, I always tell my wife, I'm like, in this day and age, there is no excuse for ignorance anymore. I mean, it used to be you could maybe make an argument of, well, I can't go to the library. I don't have a car or I can't afford gas or I don't have the time. It is still kind of bullshit even back then, I think. I don't think there's been an excuse for ignorance for a long time, but you can at least make an argument. Now it's like, do you have a smartphone? Do you have a computer or access to one? Do you have the internet? Because if the answer to any of those questions is yes, there's no excuse for ignorance. As long as you know how to read, just look it up. It's not hard. It's like, how many times do people ask me questions and so often I want my response to be, Google it. Lex, what is that? Lex, what is that? What is this? Google it. Why are you asking me? It takes you time to ask me. It takes me time to see your question and answer you. My time, your time, takes both of our time. You could save us both a lot of time if you just Googled it and you'd have the answer almost instantly. You wouldn't have to wait for me to get around to answering it. Yeah, I don't know. It could be people my age and older that just aren't used to it. It's funny. We were playing Mage the other night. I'm playing in a Mage game now. And we're at the end of the game and someone brought up the idea. They're like, hey, we should make a shared document to keep notes of what's happening and things we want to remember in the campaign. And then everybody, all the players can contribute and it's not up to one person to keep all the notes or whatever. And I was like, what a great idea. I'll do that. I can do that for you guys. I'll make a Google Doc and I'll share it with everyone. So I had notes. And that was one of the reasons I volunteered to do it, because I had taken notes during the session. But you know what I did? You know how I took those notes? I took those notes using a pencil in a physical paper notebook. So I then had to turn around and type them into Google Docs. And as I'm doing that, I'm like, why did I do this? We're playing this game online. I was at the computer playing this game on Discord. And I'm handwriting notes with a pencil. I can type a hell of a lot faster than I can write, let me tell you. And it's a lot more legible. And my hands don't cramp and everything else that you get from writing things by hand. I'm like, why on earth was I writing? I had a whole page of handwritten notes. It didn't even occur to me to type it in a Word document or a Google Doc or something like that. Just because that's what I'm used to. When I started playing D&D, there was no internet. And I did have a computer at home and they had computers at the school, but there were no laptops either. There certainly weren't any smartphones. So, back then, if you needed to take notes on something, the quickest, easiest way to do it was just to grab a pen and a piece of paper and go for it. But that hasn't been the case for a while now. You can take notes on your phone. You don't even have to write it. You can dictate it. You can talk to it and it might even understand it and get it like partly correct. But you can at least, you can type it into your phone, or even better, if you're on a computer and you have an actual keyboard, you can type it into that. Most of us probably, if you learned how to type, you can type a lot faster than you can write by hand. And then it's a lot easier for you and everyone else to read it. You can also share it a lot more easier. You don't have to photocopy it and mail it to someone or scan it and email it. So yeah, we get stuck in our ways. We get used to doing things a certain way, and we still do it that way, even if there's a better way. So that was kind of funny for me. I'm like, here I am, and I'm a techie guy. Like, I love technology. I love gadgets. I'm playing this game on my computer. I'm at the computer, and I'm writing the notes by hand. So yeah, now we have this shared Google Doc. So hopefully from now on, I'll remember to type it into that instead of writing it by hand. But yeah, I thought that was kind of funny. And, so we all do this. It's not like I'm here saying I'm better than you. And it's like, why do you guys do this? You shouldn't do that. I do it too, believe me. So yeah, if you think you know something and you're a little fuzzy or you think you might be, just look it up. It doesn't take long. And if you're a writer like me, if you are serious, if you want to be published, or even if you want to self-publish, or you're an editor or you want to be one, if we're talking fiction here or nonfiction, I highly recommend you get the Chicago Manual style. Now, you have two options. You can go analog, old school, which is what I did, and buy the actual physical book. It's a hardback. It's a deadly weapon. You could crack someone's skull with it, probably pretty easily. I think it's around $55, I think, on like Amazon or whatever. I don't know what the actual cover price is, but I got it from Amazon. It's a little discount, I think, but I think it was around $55, which it's not cheap, but it's a hardback book. It's a big, thick book. They put out new editions. I think it's like every 7 years or something. And I mean, the changes are pretty minor. So it's not like if you buy one now, you're going to have to buy another one in 7 years. You can probably skip a few editions, or maybe just never buy another one, just use the one you have. So you can go that route. There's also an online version, which you can get a trial. I think it's a 30-day free trial, and they're not a sponsor or anything. I wish I could get a kickback for plugging them, but I don't. But you can get a free trial and check it out, which I did. And it is super sweet because it's a website. So if you're writing and you're wondering about, when do I spell a number versus not? When do I use a hyphen versus not? Should I use a serial comma? Or any kind of, grammar or any kind of question like that, you can just go to the website, type it into the search bar, and boom, there it is. It's super easy, super convenient. And it's awesome. I loved it for the 30 days I had it for free. The problem with it though, and the reason I got the physical book is after your free trial, it's a subscription kind of thing. So I don't remember if you have to pay every month or every 6 months or every year or what. I think it's one of those things where you have the option, if you pay every month, it's a little bit more. If you pay every 6 months, it's a little bit less. If you pay every year, it's even a little bit less. But it's a continual thing you have to pay for over and over and over, where the book, you buy it and you've got it forever. The book isn't quite as convenient because, you have to look in the index and actually flip through physical pages. It isn't quite as fast as using a website. But it's also a lot, if you're someone that would sit down and read sections about this, it's, for me, a lot more enjoyable to do that with a physical book than sit on and look through a website for an hour. And I do that. Like I'm not reading the thing cover to cover, but sometimes I go down a rabbit hole. Like one thing I like, and I don't want to get in trouble, but I am not a huge fan of the singular they. And it has nothing to do with not wanting a genderless pronoun other than it to use with people. I am all for that. We need that. We need pronouns to refer to people that do not refer to gender or sex, that aren't he or she, that are something in between or neither, right? We need that. Like I don't have any problem with that at all. I am all for that. I just am not a fan of using they to refer to one person because you end up with some really awkward sounding sentences and it can make scenes confusing. There have been times, I'm reading a book and they have like maybe a genderless character or something. So they're referring to them by they. And there have been times where I'm literally confused. Are we talking about this one person or are we talking about everyone in the room? And the way it's written, it's kind of ambiguous. And, anytime your reader is confused and they're having to reread a sentence or a paragraph over and over to try to figure out what's going on, like that's not good. And, I know that the singular they has been around for a long time. It's been used for a long time for when like you don't know who someone is. Like, if you're talking about a murderer and you don't know who the murderer is, you might say, they killed the person with a knife, right? But it's awkward when you use it to the point that people will avoid using it whenever they can. So we need a pronoun that actually has a singular and a plural form like the other pronouns do. And, this is a huge can of worms. I know that there have been numerous such pronouns put forth by different people and groups, and none of them have really caught on. I don't have an answer. I've tried to come up with an answer. I mean, I write science fiction, and, I thought about this a lot. Like, can I come up with a different pronoun that I can use in my books, or can I find one of these others that other people have come up with and use that? And yeah, I don't think there's been a good solution put forth yet because, the ones I've seen, I can see why they didn't take off because they're awkward or weird or the spellings are weird or whatever. I suspect the answer lies in other languages because there are other languages that have genderless pronouns. Like, for instance, German does. They have masculine, feminine, and neutral pronouns for everything because German is like Spanish or French, where nouns have a gender. So like in Spanish, la casa, the house. Casa is a feminine noun. So you use la, which is the feminine word for the. So German is like that. But unlike French and Spanish, German has 3 genders. They have male, female, and neuter, which is neither. So, and there are other languages too. So I think maybe the answer lies in one of these languages, maybe an obscure language that not a lot of people know, that maybe has some just beautiful, elegant solution to this that we could adopt. But I'm not a linguist. I don't know what that is. But wow, I got on a tangent. What was I even talking about? Oh, I was talking about the Chicago Manual of Style. So I was curious what the Chicago Manual of Style said about it, because I'm like, if this comes up in my book, what should I do? Should I just use the singular they, even though I personally don't care for it? I think it's clunky, and it can lead to confusion. And that's really why I was curious what the style guide said, because the purpose of all these rules, like sometimes people wonder, like, why do we have to have all these grammar rules and stuff? Like, what's the point? The point is for clarity. Again, our number one job as a writer, any kind of writer, is to communicate. And a fundamental part of that is clarity, is the reader understanding what you mean, what you're trying to say. And punctuation and grammar help with that. It's a system, so the reader understands what you're trying to say. So, all of these rules, like even the serial comma is a perfect example. The serial comma exists to prevent confusion, because there can be instances, if you don't use a serial comma, that it can be ambiguous, where a sentence could mean a couple different things. And I don't have examples for you, but just Google it and you can find examples. Just Google something like, pros and cons of the serial comma or whatever. There are some fantastic articles out there I've read that give really great examples of sentences where if you don't have the serial comma, the sentence can actually mean a couple different things, and it can be confusing. So that's why the serial comma exists, to avoid that confusion and to make it more clear. So that's why I was really curious, what does the Chicago Manual of Style say about the singular they? Because that introduces confusion. And by definition, the style guide is striving to avoid confusion. So what's their solution? And their solution is to use the singular they. So they don't have a better answer either. So yeah, if you're wondering, that's the answer. So if you're writing fiction and you're wondering, should I use one of these weird pronouns people have come up with, or should I use the singular they to refer to someone who's genderless or who we don't know their gender or something like that? According to Chicago Manual of Style, you should use the singular they. But anyway, I went down this rabbit hole and I read, I think they had a whole chapter on this. And it was illuminating, and they really broke it down and went into, the different uses and why they recommend it and all this stuff. And it was very illuminating and educational. And yeah, I'm convinced that for right now, the singular they is the best answer that we have. Hopefully someday someone brilliant will come up with something better that everybody likes. Because so far people have come up with alternatives, but not everybody likes them. But yeah, if there's any linguists out there that know like a bunch of languages, or at least know pronouns in a bunch of languages, maybe you can be the person to figure this out. Hi, everyone. Editor Lex here. I was editing this episode and realized I left out something kind of important that I just want to be clear. So in the Chicago Manual of Style, we're talking about, or they were talking about the singular they and pronouns and whatnot. All of this discussion, what I've been talking about is, you writing fiction, writing about people that you're making up, characters you're making up, characters who don't exist in real life. But the Chicago Manual of Style is also used for nonfiction. So if you're writing nonfiction and you're writing about an actual person who exists, you use whatever pronoun they want to use. That's what the Chicago Manual of Style says. If they want to use they, you use they. If they want to use some other alternate pronoun, like I think one is Z, you use that. So you use the pronoun that the person prefers, period, full stop, end of sentence. It's really just that simple. I know some people get bent about this kind of thing. I'm sure none of them listen to this show. But, in my mind, it's like names, right? Like you don't argue with people about how they spell their names, right? Like if some guy's name is Bob and he spells it B-A-H-B, you don't refuse to spell his name that way, right? Because it's his name and people get to decide how they spell their names. So in the same way, people get to decide the pronouns that are used to refer to them. So yeah, I just wanted to add that because it slipped my mind to mention that when I was talking about that. This was all kind of off the cuff. And I don't want people to think that I or the Chicago Manual of Style is trying to dictate what pronouns people use, because that's very much not the case. Also, something interesting about this that I also forgot to mention, I was thinking about it, but I couldn't remember exactly what it was when I did the original recording. The Chicago Manual of Style is also okay with the word themself. So if you're using the singular they to refer to someone in a usage where if you were using a gendered pronoun, you'd use the pronoun himself or herself, it is correct to say themself. So they thought to themselves. That is grammatically correct. It might sound a little strange to you because, it's not a construction we're used to hearing a lot, although I'm sure as time goes forward, we'll hear it more and more. But that is correct, and you're totally okay to do that. So just to end this, I thought I'd share some other things I've learned from the Chicago Manual of Style and other places while writing this last book that I didn't know that I've been doing wrong for quite a while. The fact that all right is not a word. All right, one word, A-L-R-I-G-H-T, that's wrong. That is not a word. All right is two words, A-L-L space R-I-G-H-T, 2 words. Someone please tell Microsoft, because Microsoft Word thinks that all right is a word and it doesn't flag it. The spell check doesn't flag it. And this is literally something I learned while I was writing this book, because I was actually reading a book by someone else and they were using all right as 2 words. And it looked really weird to me and I thought it was wrong. But I'm like, this is a book published by a big publisher. I really doubt that they would consistently make this mistake. So I must be wrong, or maybe I'm wrong. So I went and looked it up and come to find out, oh yeah, all right is 2 words. And, all right, 1 word, it's a slang here in the US at least, but it's not grammatically, it's not technically correct. If you're writing something, that you want to publish, don't do that. You'll look like an amateur. It's not correct. But Having said that, it's the same book. They were using the British spelling of Gray, and they were not a British author, and they were not writing for a British audience. So that was flat out wrong. Gray with an E is not correct in American English. And it wasn't someone's name, it was the color. And they were doing that, and they got away with that. So I don't know. But there are writers that will die on that hill who are not British, who are American, who are not writing for a British readership, but they want to spell Gray with an E for some reason. Again, it's all about clarity, right? Of course, that one's so common that it's probably not really going to confuse anyone, other than people are confused about how you actually spell it, but they know what you mean. Yeah, speaking of American versus British English, toward versus towards. Oh my gosh, this used to always confuse me. It's actually really simple. You only need to know one of these, okay? So if you're an American, it's toward, no S. If you're British, it's towards with an S. So yeah, you don't have to remember, when do I use toward, when do I use towards? It just depends which side of the pond are you on, or who are you writing for? And then you use that one. So if you're American, or you're writing for Americans or for an American publisher, no S, just toward. If you're British or you're writing for a British readership, it's towards with an S. Which, by the way, here's another tangent for you. Wouldn't English grammar and spelling be so much easier if all of us English speakers could just come together and agree on one standard for spelling? Wouldn't that be fantastic? Of course, it can't happen because everybody would want their way, right? Like I'd be like, no, Gray should have an A. And the Brits would be like, no, it should have an E. So yeah, everybody would want it to be the way that they know, so they don't have to learn something new. So my suggestion, if we have some kind of world grammar or language or spelling conference to decide this, is just go through them, and every time there's a discrepancy, choose the spelling with the fewer letters. We're getting to let's save a character. Let's save a keystroke. So toward versus towards. Let's say toward because it's one less letter. Now, this doesn't help us with Gray versus Gray because they're both the same. They're both 4 letters. So yeah. Oh yeah. Gray with an A is American spelling. Gray with an E is the British spelling. Now, if it's a name, that's for the color. If it's a name, it's however they spell it. For instance, I actually have a character. I think I did this as a joke. I have a character in my book whose last name is Gray, and I spell it with an E because it's a name. And names can be spelled however people want to spell them. So I don't know. When it comes to Gray versus Gray, how do we solve that? If we're all going to agree? I don't know. My suggestion is each country chooses a champion and they arm wrestle. That's the best I got. Oh, and while we're at it, can we all agree to use metric? Please and thank you. Thank you. It's so much easier when everything can be divided by 10. I'm just saying. All right. Hopefully I haven't offended anyone or pissed anyone off. And the last thing I would want to do is offend someone that I don't want to offend. And there's nobody I want to offend with this podcast, except maybe people who insist that Pluto is a planet. I don't really care if I offend them because it's not. All right. If you would like to convince me that Pluto is a planet, you can email me at lexoutloudpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter @LexStarWalker, and you can call my voicemail. I can't even talk anymore. 951-465-5391. Join our community on Discord, would you? But don't come in there and debate how we should spell Gray or whether Pluto is a planet. Send that to me. The other listeners, they don't want to hear that. But join our Discord and hang out with us there. We have a good time. And you can find links to the Discord and all those other things in the show notes at lexstarwalker.com/LOL. So yeah, that's it for me today. I think I've dug a deep enough hole. I'm going to climb out now while I still can. I hope you all have a great week. I wish you the best of luck on whatever you're working on. And, just keep at it. Just keep on keeping on. That's really the way to succeed, is just keep at it. Keep going. Don't stop. So until next time, keep writing.